You're overpaid for what you do. That was the first sentence she ever said to me. Not hello, not welcome aboard. Just flat, unapologetic, and cold. I blinked once, smiled politely, and thanked her. As I walked out of her office, I began the quiet countdown she never saw coming. I'm Evelyn Carter. I was the director of operations at Harborview Medical Systems for almost 2 decades, 18 years, to be exact. Long enough to know every department's quirks, every manager's ego, and every executive's blind spots. I wasn't flashy, and I didn't care for titles or being the loudest voice in the boardroom. But I knew how to keep a healthcare company running smoothly from the inside out. People used to call me the backbone of Harborview. I led the restructuring during the 2008 recession, spearheaded patient care improvements before patient satisfaction scores became industry standard, and smoothed over internal crises before they reached legal. I had mentored 5 of our department heads, coached leaders through chaos, and rebuilt teams after devastating turnovers, all without needing applause. Then along came Samantha Rhodes. 36, fresh from a high-profile consulting gig, polished to perfection with a Harvard MBA and a portfolio of sleek PowerPoint decks. She'd been appointed CEO by a board eager to modernize. From day one, it was clear she wasn't here to preserve anything. She was here to disrupt. Her first week, she didn't meet with department leads. Instead, she sent out a mass email about a recalibration initiative and fired 4 mid-level managers by Friday. She renamed our conference rooms Momentum, Synergy, and Velocity and declared that printed memos were antiquated. When my assistant told me I had a one-on-one with her, I straightened my blazer, gathered my notes, and went in ready to highlight our department's key wins. She didn't look up from her tablet when I sat down. Evelyn Carter, she said flatly. How long have you been here? 18 years this May, I replied. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Right. Legacy salaries. Without glancing up, she tapped a screen and said, You're overpaid for what you do. Starting next pay cycle, we're reducing your compensation by 30%. I don't remember what crossed my face, only that I sat up straighter. I could have argued. I could have pointed to the staff turnover I had lowered, the vendor contracts I had renegotiated, the patient satisfaction rates I had improved. But I didn't. I smiled. I said, understood. Because something in her tone, her posture, her complete dismissal of me told me this wasn't personal. It was worse. I wasn't a person to her. I was a line item. She saw an older woman. I was 52, not flashy, not loud, not cutting edge. She saw someone she thought she could erase quietly and efficiently. And that's when I knew. She thought she had cut me down to size. But what she really gave me was something far more powerful: clarity. What happens when you show a woman like me that she's no longer bound by loyalty? You'll find out. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even call my closest friend. I walked out of Samantha's office, went into the staff lounge, locked the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. For one long minute, I said nothing. And then I smiled. Not the smile of defeat. The smile of a woman who had just been given permission to stop protecting people who no longer deserved it. Samantha made a fatal mistake. She assumed women like me don't keep score. She didn't know we'd been keeping score long before she learned how to play the game. In the weeks that followed, the quiet dismantling began. My office was moved without notice. I came back from lunch to find a younger woman, Claire, at my desk, smiling sweetly, saying she'd been assigned to shadow me. My calendar was stripped of leadership meetings, replaced with admin tasks I hadn't done in years. Claire, meanwhile, was given broad access to our systems, access she didn't know how to use. But I knew. I watched. I observed the gaps, the compliance oversights, the vendor relationships neglected, the budgets miscalculated. I began arriving early, staying late, backing up critical data, and quietly recording every irregularity. While they were busy cutting costs, I was preparing the net to catch them when they fell. And then I walked away. Not to retirement, to Baycrest Health, a growing competitor that had been courting me for over a year. With me came the playbook, the strategy, and, most importantly, the people Samantha had failed to value. By the time Harborview realized what they had lost, it was too late. Staff turnover skyrocketed, vendors pulled contracts, patient scores plummeted, and the board came knocking. And me? I didn't need revenge. I had something better. I had moved on, built again, and this time I wasn't invisible. Because the truth is, legacy isn't old news. Legacy is the foundation you stand on when the winds change, and when you know your worth, no one can cut you down. It wasn't the smile of someone surrendering. It was the quiet grin of a woman who had finally been released from shielding those who no longer deserved her loyalty. Samantha had made a critical error. She assumed women like me didn't keep track. What she didn't understand was that we've been tracking every move long before she even knew the game existed. In the days that followed, the indignities didn't stop, they multiplied, creeping in with calculated subtlety. First came the office switch. No announcement. No heads up. I came back from lunch to find a young woman, Claire, seated at my desk, casually arranging office supplies like she'd always belonged there. There was no nameplate, no formal introduction. Just her smile as she said, "Oh, didn't they mention? I'm the new special assistant to the CEO." Samantha wanted me positioned closer. So, I gathered my things. No fuss, no frustration. I relocated quietly to the desk wedged between the copy machine and the drafty window, where the heater clanked and the overhead light buzzed faintly. Then came the calendar changes. My schedule, once packed with leadership roundtables and strategic briefings, was now reduced to clerical duties and basic operations tasks I hadn't handled in 15 years. Meanwhile, Claire was granted access to the operational database, schedules, budgets, compliance files, vendor contracts. She was supposedly there to shadow me, but we both knew her real assignment: monitor and report. She even gave me a nickname, Evie, in front of junior staff, as if we were girlfriends. I let it slide. I stayed silent because I was watching, too. I noticed how Claire snapped photos of reports she didn't understand, how Samantha's cost-cutting ignored critical compliance risks, how vendor agreements were misfiled, how the internal audit flagged gaps that were swiftly dismissed. They thought I was fading into the background. But I was sharpening my aim. Every morning, I arrived 15 minutes early. Every evening, I stayed 20 minutes late. Quietly, I archived essential documents, saved system logs, reviewed user permissions, and compiled a detailed record of access trails. Nobody questioned me. I was still just Evelyn, after all. That was their second, and fatal, mistake. Because while they slashed budgets and hosted innovation workshops, I was methodically preparing the very snare they were walking into, a trap built from the very infrastructure I had designed to safeguard them. It was almost poetic. For nearly 2 decades, I had been the invisible safety net, catching missteps before they became disasters, keeping the entire machine humming when no one even noticed. But now I was no longer the net. I was the thread. And when you pull the right thread, the entire fabric comes undone. All I needed was one last push. And Samantha, in her overconfidence, was about to hand it to me on a silver platter. It happened on a bleak Thursday, one of those damp Chicago mornings when the wind cuts through even the heaviest coat. A mandatory town hall was called, held in the main auditorium. Normally, these were reserved for quarterly reports or celebrating big wins. This one? No agenda, no preview. I already knew what was coming. Samantha stood at the podium, her blazer sharp, her confidence sharper, radiating the self-satisfaction of someone about to deliver a speech she believed would cement her authority. Claire hovered nearby, clutching her iPad like a talisman. "I want to thank you all for joining us this morning," Samantha began smoothly. "As you know, we've been evaluating our organizational structure to ensure we're aligned with future goals." Her eyes flicked briefly toward me, quick, precise, cutting. "As part of that process," she continued, We've identified roles that no longer align with the company's evolving vision. And there it was. The room turned, as if on cue, their gazes locking on me. This will be Evelyn's final week with Harborview, Samantha announced. We are grateful for her years of service and wish her the best in her future endeavors. No handshake. No thank you card. No speech. Just erasure, swift, clinical, and humiliating. I had weathered hard moments in life, but that was bitter. I rose slowly, nodded once, and said, "It's been a privilege." My heels clicked on the polished floor as I walked out, calm, poised, steady. I didn't shed a tear until I reached the parking lot. But when the tears dried, something inside me hardened and something else cracked wide open. Because when you leave a place that no longer sees you, you don't just walk away. You rise. And the people who thought they could erase you? They're about to learn just how deeply your roots ran. If you like, I can continue writing the next chapter, where Evelyn's quiet comeback begins. Would you like that? Claire lingered nearby, gripping her iPad like it contained the keys to the universe. I appreciate everyone making time today, Samantha began, her voice polished and deliberate. As many of you know, we've been conducting a thorough evaluation of our internal operations to ensure we are aligned with the company's evolving priorities. Her eyes flicked toward me, brief, precise, cold, before returning to the room. As part of this transformation, she continued, we've identified several positions that are, frankly, no longer aligned with Harborview's future vision. There it was again, outdated, the word she wielded like a blade. She didn't need to say my name. Every face in that room turned toward me as if choreographed. This will be Evelyn's final week with us, Samantha declared, her tone smooth as glass. We are grateful for her years of dedication and wish her all the best in her future endeavors. And just like that, 18 years were reduced to a soundbite. No handshake, no acknowledgement, no farewell lunch. I was being written out of the company's story in real time. I had faced my share of challenges before, but this was a different kind of pain. The hush in the room was suffocating. I saw the discomfort ripple across familiar faces, colleagues I had supported through layoffs, medical emergencies, even family crises. Not one met my gaze. Too uneasy, too guilty, too afraid. Yet, beneath the sting of humiliation, I felt something unexpected, relief. Because in that moment, I understood. I owed them nothing now. I rose slowly, smoothed my blazer, and offered a single nod. It's been a privilege. My heels tapped a steady rhythm on the polished floor as I walked out, each step its own quiet drumbeat. The tears didn't come until I reached the stairwell. And they weren't for Samantha, or even for the insult. I cried because it was finished. 18 years of commitment, loyalty, and sacrifice dissolved in a handful of rehearsed sentences. How devastating. How hollow. But even through the ache, clarity emerged. I hadn't just exited a building that morning, I had walked away from a life that no longer saw me. And in doing so, I became invisible only to the people who believed visibility was power. The truth is, control lives in the quiet. That evening, at home in my small apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, I activated the contingency plan I had designed years ago, a system intended for emergencies, leadership collapse, or natural disasters. A quiet failsafe. Within 48 hours, the company's administrative privileges would begin resetting unless reauthorized with dual credentials, one of which only I possessed. My confidant, Marissa, head of IT, had already begun scrubbing the metadata to erase my digital footprints. I drafted my final memo, crisp, formal, indisputable. Effective immediately, I withdraw all personal liabilities associated with the systems, processes, and contracts developed under my direction. Access privileges previously granted under my authority are hereby revoked unless renewed in writing. Signed, Evelyn Carter. I logged out for the last time, closed my laptop, and waited. 3 days later, the messages started. First 1, then 5, then over 20. Payroll froze. Onboarding systems stalled. Compliance reports vanished into thin air. Benefits processing crashed mid-update. I forwarded every notification to my personal archive, then calmly brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea. The unraveling had begun. But make no mistake, this wasn't vengeance. This was balance being restored, the system recalibrating after toxic disruption. And the most astonishing part? They still had no idea what was unfolding. It's remarkable how swiftly things collapse when arrogance goes unchecked. By the end of the week, Harborview was spiraling. Salaries weren't processed. Vendor contracts missed deadlines. Patient care reports went missing. The board convened an emergency session. And me? I watched it all unfold from the sunlit corner office at Baycrest Health, the forward-thinking healthcare company that had courted me months before. Back then, I had said no out of loyalty. Now, I said yes, and I didn't come alone. I brought with me the systems, the strategies, and most importantly, the people Samantha had dismissed. We weren't rebuilding. We were reinventing. If you want, I can write the next part, where Evelyn leads the quiet comeback and the tables turn completely. Would you like me to? The payroll system had stalled. The HR site flashed a 403 access denied error, and benefits processing froze halfway through open enrollment. Compliance documents? Gone without a trace. The team cycled through explanations, software glitches, server outages, maybe even a cyber attack. But no matter what they tried, nothing worked. Samantha insisted it was a technical hiccup, but the truth was simpler and sharper. The system hadn't failed. It had simply moved on without them. By Monday morning, the fallout was impossible to ignore. 10 resignations quietly hit Samantha's desk, no dramatic departures, no farewell speeches. Department heads, senior managers, longtime specialists. They exited one by one, like carefully pulled stitches unraveling a garment. And every single one of them was someone I had mentored. From my bright, sunlit office at Baycrest Health, I watched the news trickle across industry feeds. While Harborview struggled to hire temps and outsource essential tasks, Baycrest moved forward with calm precision, fully staffed and remarkably prepared. Months earlier, long before Samantha ever walked into Harborview, Baycrest's leadership had approached me. They admired my work, respected my quiet influence, and asked if I would advise them on transforming their organizational culture. Back then, I turned them down out of loyalty. But when Samantha forced my hand, I didn't just accept Baycrest's offer. I brought with me the playbook, the resilience strategies, the frameworks that had kept Harborview steady through years of storms. And even more importantly, I brought the people, the ones Samantha discarded without a second thought, the ones she never bothered to understand. We weren't merely rebuilding. We were creating something entirely new. As Harborview spiraled, juggling staffing shortages, vendor penalties, and mounting patient complaints, Baycrest absorbed the talent wave rolling across the city. While Samantha scrambled for consultants, Baycrest was already onboarding some of the industry's best, seamlessly integrating systems and boosting morale. Then came the masterstroke. Baycrest announced the acquisition of Harborview's struggling research division. Publicly, it was framed as a strategic partnership and a portfolio expansion. Behind the press releases and corporate buzzwords, however, one detail remained conveniently unpublicized. I had been placed in charge of the integration. 3 weeks after being publicly dismissed, I walked into a Baycrest conference room to lead the transition meeting Samantha was now required to attend. The moment she saw me, her composure cracked. She blinked twice, mouth parting slightly, hands tightening around her folder. For a few heartbeats, she looked like someone caught in a waking nightmare. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply smiled, measured, professional, and extended my hand. Welcome to our transition alignment session, Ms. Rhodes. I trust you've reviewed the briefing materials. Samantha struggled for words, but nothing came out. Claire, the eager assistant once shadowing my every move, was noticeably absent. The rumor mill suggested she'd been quietly dismissed after a security breach, unauthorized data access, they said. Not shocking. The symmetry of it all was almost too perfect, too surreal. The woman who once slashed my salary and shoved me aside now sat across from me, watching as I led the very conversation she could barely follow, reviewing the systems I had designed, inside the structure I helped build. Under my leadership, the integration moved swiftly and efficiently. Samantha, for all her polished speeches and slide decks, was sidelined, relegated to a figurehead advisory role with no decision-making power. And those same colleagues who had averted their eyes in that final, humiliating meeting at Harborview? Now, they waited for my approval. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. Poetic, really. Because when you erase someone without understanding their value, you don't just lose a name, you unravel the very fabric they held together. And sometimes, the greatest power isn't in fighting back. It's in stepping aside, letting collapse run its course and returning when the dust has settled, not for applause, but to build something better. If you like, I can continue with the next chapter, where Evelyn's leadership reshapes Baycrest and she launches her legacy program. Would you like that? When you remove someone without grasping the depth of their contributions, you don't just lose a worker, you dismantle the entire foundation they upheld. And when ego replaces experience, you may soon find yourself living the life you once thought beneath you. Not the success, not the influence, but the quiet defeat, the marginalization, the irrelevance you thought you could impose on others. That was where Samantha ended up. For someone whose sense of self was built around titles, status, and authority, being relegated to a figurehead advisor was a slow kind of collapse. Her name still adorned the office door, but the space no longer held weight. She began arriving late, stumbling through reports, losing track of project details, like someone reading words on a page they hadn't authored. And the most telling part? Nobody seemed to notice. She was fading inch by inch, in the very way she'd once tried to erase me. The symmetry of it all was almost too perfect. Meanwhile, I did what I had always done. I kept the machine humming. Under my guidance, the integration between Baycrest and the newly acquired research division was completed 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Retention numbers steadied. Teams that had once worked in silos began to collaborate seamlessly. For the first time in ages, the energy on the floor wasn't heavy or fearful. It was light, eager, even joyful. People weren't just showing up to clock in, they were engaged, creative, hopeful. It was never about me. It never had been. But this time, I was no longer invisible. And that mattered. One afternoon, as I walked past the second-floor lounge, I spotted Samantha standing by the coffee machine. She looked smaller somehow, as though she'd shrunk under the weight of the past few weeks. Her hair was slightly undone, and the crispness she once carried had softened into something more fragile. She turned as I approached. "Evelyn," she murmured, her voice unusually quiet. "Can we talk?" I paused, then nodded. "Of course." We slipped into a small meeting room, neutral territory. No glass walls, no audience. Just two women, face to face. She didn't sit. She braced her hands on the table, fingers curling over the edge like she was holding herself up. "I didn't see it," she said softly. "What you were holding together." I waited. "I thought you were just legacy," she admitted, voice catching slightly. "A line on a spreadsheet." I didn't understand it all would come apart. I tilted my head slightly, not unkindly. "But you didn't ask, did you?" She dropped her gaze, shoulders sinking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And here's the honest truth, I believed her. But believing didn't erase the damage. Apologies can't rehire the talent that walked out. They can't undo the fractures left behind. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "But this isn't about me anymore. It's about what happens next." She gave a small, defeated nod. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Almost. But then I remembered the day she slashed my pay, belittled my role, and dismissed years of service with a smirk. I remembered packing my belongings while Claire sat at my desk. I remembered walking out, unseen, unheard, after almost 2 decades of building something from the inside out. And, just like that, the sympathy faded. Some people need to walk through the fire themselves to understand the heat. That evening, the message arrived from the executive board. Samantha would be stepping down. Officially, it was framed as a voluntary transition. But everyone knew the reality. She was out. And the kicker? She'd been offered a reassignment, a junior consultant post at a regional clinic in Arizona, reporting to a manager half her age. Poetic justice, served without bitterness, just quiet finality. If you want, I can help write the next part where Evelyn mentors new leaders and shapes her true legacy. Would you like me to draft that? Incredible, really, the woman who once told me I was a relic, overcompensated for my role, was now being offered a fraction of her former pay to sit on the sidelines. It was corporate karma, delivered with a polished grin. I didn't throw a party. I didn't boast. But alone in my office, I allowed myself one quiet breath of satisfaction. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, where I had kept the formal memo Samantha had given me, the one announcing my demotion and salary cut. I held it one last time, read over the words that once stung so deeply, then calmly shredded it into ribbons and let them fall into the recycling bin. That chapter had reached its end. But my journey? It was only just beginning. Because this wasn't only about Samantha. It was about every woman who had been dismissed as too reserved to lead, too seasoned to matter, or too costly to keep on the payroll. It was about demonstrating, without fanfare, that true value isn't always measured by volume. That consistency isn't weakness. That experience isn't a burden, it's a foundation. And when you rebuild on a foundation like that, you don't just recover. You endure. As the dust settled, I didn't clamor for attention. There was no media blast announcing my new position, no glowing profile in a business magazine. And honestly, I was grateful for that. I didn't need a title to affirm my worth. I had already proven the most important truth. What I had crafted could stand without me. At Baycrest Health, I officially stepped into the role of Chief People Officer. It wasn't just a new job. It was the natural unfolding of everything I had worked toward, everything I believed in, and everything I was determined to leave behind. I wasn't there to clutch power. I was there to help shape the future. So, I did something different. I opened my door, quite literally. Every Tuesday, I held open office hours, not for the executives or board members, but for those usually overlooked, the assistants, the junior staff, the women returning after family leave, the mid-career employees questioning their path forward. I knew what it was like to feel invisible, and I vowed that under my leadership, no one would walk those halls feeling unseen. I launched a leadership program called Second Bloom, designed specifically for women over 40. Its core idea was simple: legacy doesn't signal the end. It marks the moment you come into full bloom. To my surprise, the inaugural program filled in just days. Word spread quickly, applications poured in, and something within me began to unfold, too. One afternoon, as I sorted through paperwork, a handwritten note arrived on my desk from a young staffer I had barely interacted with. It read, "Thank you for showing me that quiet isn't weakness, that experience doesn't expire, and that the ones who hold everything together deserve to be seen, not just used." I sat still, the letter trembling slightly in my hands, eyes misting. Because in the end, this was never about revenge or triumph or settling old scores. It was always about making space. About lifting others into their full worth without waiting for permission. As for Samantha? Last I heard, she had taken the regional role in Tucson, no executive assistant, no high-level strategy meetings, just a nameplate on the door and a long list of what-ifs. I don't see her as a villain. I see her as a lesson. Some climb by standing on others. The ones who truly last? They build platforms so everyone can rise. That, to me, is the real definition of legacy. Not the titles you carry with you, but the structures you leave standing long after you're gone. And I was ready to keep building, ready to keep lifting, and ready to pass the torch someday, knowing the roots I'd helped nurture would hold. I once thought legacy lived in farewell parties or plaques on the wall. But now I understand legacy is quiet. It lives in the systems we design to protect and empower those around us. Would you like me to help draft the final reflective chapter or an epilogue for this story? Let me know. Incredible, really, the woman who once told me I was a relic, overcompensated for my role, was now being offered a fraction of her former pay to sit on the sidelines. It was corporate karma, delivered with a polished grin. I didn't throw a party. I didn't boast. But alone in my office, I allowed myself one quiet breath of satisfaction. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, where I had kept the formal memo Samantha had given me, the one announcing my demotion and salary cut. I held it one last time, read over the words that once stung so deeply, then calmly shredded it into ribbons and let them fall into the recycling bin. That chapter had reached its end. But my journey? It was only just beginning. Because this wasn't only about Samantha. It was about every woman who had been dismissed as too reserved to lead, too seasoned to matter, or too costly to keep on the payroll. It was about demonstrating, without fanfare, that true value isn't always measured by volume. That consistency isn't weakness. That experience isn't a burden, it's a foundation. And when you rebuild on a foundation like that, you don't just recover. You endure. As the dust settled, I didn't clamor for attention. There was no media blast announcing my new position, no glowing profile in a business magazine. And honestly, I was grateful for that. I didn't need a title to affirm my worth. I had already proven the most important truth. What I had crafted could stand without me. At Baycrest Health, I officially stepped into the role of Chief People Officer. It wasn't just a new job. It was the natural unfolding of everything I had worked toward, everything I believed in, and everything I was determined to leave behind. I wasn't there to clutch power. I was there to help shape the future. So I did something different. I opened my door, quite literally. Every Tuesday, I held open office hours, not for the executives or board members, but for those usually overlooked, the assistants, the junior staff, the women returning after family leave, the mid-career employees questioning their path forward. I knew what it was like to feel invisible, and I vowed that under my leadership, no one would walk those halls feeling unseen. I launched a leadership program called Second Bloom, designed specifically for women over 40. Its core idea was simple: legacy doesn't signal the end. It marks the moment you come into full bloom. To my surprise, the inaugural program filled in just days. Word spread quickly, applications poured in, and something within me began to unfold, too. One afternoon, as I sorted through paperwork, a handwritten note arrived on my desk from a young staffer I had barely interacted with. It read, "Thank you for showing me that quiet isn't weakness, that experience doesn't expire, and that the ones who hold everything together deserve to be seen, not just used." I sat still, the letter trembling slightly in my hands, eyes misting. Because in the end, this was never about revenge or triumph or settling old scores. It was always about making space, about lifting others into their full worth without waiting for permission. As for Samantha, last I heard, she had taken the regional role in Tucson, no executive assistant, no high-level strategy meetings, just a nameplate on the door and a long list of what-ifs. I don't see her as a villain. I see her as a lesson. Some climb by standing on others. The ones who truly last, they build platforms so everyone can rise. That, to me, is the real definition of legacy. Not the titles you carry with you, but the structures you leave standing long after you're gone. And I was ready to keep building, ready to keep lifting, and ready to pass the torch someday, knowing the roots I'd helped nurture would hold. I once thought legacy lived in farewell parties or plaques on the wall. But now I understand legacy is quiet. It lives in the systems we design to protect and empower those around us. Would you like me to help draft the final reflective chapter or an epilogue for this story? Let me know. It lives in the emerging leaders we support, the colleagues we guide, and the respect we uphold even when no one's watching. It's in the young assistant who discovers her confidence because someone believed in her potential. It's in the parent returning to the workforce who no longer has to rebuild from scratch. It's in the experienced professional who finally understands she's not past her moment, she's standing squarely in it. That's the heart of what I pour myself into now. And it's what I plan to keep doing until the day I decide to step back for good. There was a time when I believed that slipping away quietly was the only noble path, when I convinced myself that strength meant silence. But I understand now that true power sometimes comes through speaking calmly, firmly, and without asking permission. I don't think much about Samantha these days. When she does cross my mind, it's not with resentment. It's with perspective. She reminded me of something I had buried under years of dedication. You don't have to remain in a place just because you were part of building it. You can leave, and you can craft something even stronger, even wiser, even freer on your own terms. The best part? I didn't have to break anyone down to reclaim my worth. I simply stepped away and let time reveal the truth. What happened to Samantha wasn't vengeance. It was the natural outcome of unchecked ego. And what happened to me? That was transformation. Now, when I enter a room, I no longer shrink or wonder if I'm seen. I bring presence, the kind that's built not through shouting, but through deeply knowing your own value and refusing to let anyone diminish it. So, let me turn this to you. Have you ever been dismissed, overlooked, or replaced by someone who didn't see your true worth? What did you do next? If that wound still lingers, hear this. Your journey isn't finished. You are far from invisible. And your value was never defined by the title they handed you or the paycheck they reduced. It lives in what you've created. In what still stands because you had the courage to stand for it. Share your story below. Someone out there may need to hear it today. Together, we can build a legacy no one can erase. I want to invite you to share your thoughts and your support, not just for me, but for every person who's walked a path like mine. Leave a comment below. Tell me what part of this story spoke to you. Have you been in a place where you were overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed after years of loyalty and hard work? What did you do to reclaim your strength? Your words can lift someone else today, just as mine are meant to remind you that none of us walk this journey alone. Here's what I've learned and what I hope you'll carry with you. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, strength is the quiet decision to walk away from a place that no longer values you and to choose yourself instead. It's knowing when loyalty becomes a cage and when stepping into the unknown is the most powerful thing you can do. You don't have to crush anyone to rise. You don't have to scream to be heard. You can stand steady in your truth, walk with dignity, and let your actions and your absence speak for themselves. So, here's my advice to you. Know your worth before someone else tries to define it for you. Remember that the skills, wisdom, and care you bring to the table matter. You are not too old, too quiet, or too much trouble to keep around. And if you're in a place that makes you feel invisible, remember, you have the right to walk away and create something better. Build something that lasts, not just for yourself, but for those who will come after you. Share your story. Lift others, and together we will create a legacy no one can erase. I can't wait to read what you have to say.